On the 19th of December, 1944, General Dwight D. Eisenhower convened an urgent meeting in a damp and dimly lit barracks at Verdun. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the air heavy with the cold and the sense of impending disaster. The German forces were advancing relentlessly, and the American lines were fraying under pressure. Across the Western Front, the situation was deteriorating by the hour. In the midst of this chaos, Eisenhower turned to General George S. Patton, his eyes searching for some glimmer of hope. He asked the question that hung over the room like a guillotine. How soon could Patton turn his entire army 90 degrees and march north to counter the German advance? The silence that followed was palpable. Every officer present knew the weight of the inquiry. The Germans had executed a sudden offensive that created a massive bulge in the Allied lines. The 101st Airborne Division was trapped in Bastogne, encircled by the enemy. Across a 60-mile front, American forces were retreating under relentless assault. Patton's Third Army, formidable and battle-hardened, was still 100 miles to the south, entrenched in combat in the Saar region. To reach Bastogne and relieve the trapped forces, Patton would have to disengage from his current operations, execute a 90-degree pivot with his entire army, traverse icy winter roads, and strike into the heart of the most potent German offensive since D-Day. The other generals at Verdun studied the maps carefully, running the numbers in their heads. 2 weeks seemed the minimum, perhaps 3 if the weather worsened. Patton, however, offered his answer without hesitation. He stated simply that he could launch an attack on the morning of the 22nd of December. The room fell silent for 3 long seconds, though it felt like an eternity. General Omar Bradley, ever cautious, suspected theatrics. British officers exchanged skeptical glances, and even Eisenhower, usually composed, seemed caught off guard by the sheer confidence. But Patton was not bluffing. He had already devised 3 complete attack plans, meticulously prepared for every contingency. Every division's movements, every road to be used, every strike point on the German flank had been determined with precision. What none of the Allied commanders realized was that, just 50 miles to the north, German intelligence officers were conducting their own calculations, certain that Patton could not possibly arrive sooner than 2 weeks. They were wrong, disastrously so. Major General Hasso von Montiel commanded the German 5th Panzer Army, advancing toward Bastogne from the north and east. Confident in the imminent collapse of the town, he relied on detailed intelligence assessments that indicated no American reinforcements could arrive in time. Patton's Third Army, the closest substantial American force, was still fully engaged in the Saar region. Von Montiel's calculations, rooted in experience and doctrine, estimated at least a fortnight would be necessary for Patton to disengage, regroup, and mount a northward offensive. Every logistical factor, the distance to cover, winter road conditions, fuel supplies, ammunition, and coordination for a full army movement, had been meticulously analyzed. Hitler's orders demanded rapid progress toward Antwerp, and von Montiel privately doubted the ultimate goal, but he remained confident that Patton would not interfere. The plan was sound, or so they believed. German operational doctrine assumed deliberate, cautious preparation for major movements. Moving an army was not instantaneous. It required days of methodical planning. Units needed to be rotated systematically, supply depots repositioned, artillery moved alongside infantry. Coordination and timing were everything. German officers assumed that the Americans, like them, would follow similar procedures. They expected Patton to slow down, to prepare, to calculate every movement with care, as American forces had done before. They did not anticipate that Patton had already anticipated the entire scenario, weeks in advance. On the 12th of December, 4 days before the German assault began, Patton convened his staff. He had been monitoring German troop movements in the Ardennes, noting concentrations that suggested an imminent offensive. He told his officers that, when the Germans attacked, Eisenhower would require Third Army to intervene swiftly. Colonel Oscar Koch, Patton's intelligence officer, had been tracking the buildup and warned of a pending German strike. Patton ordered his chief of staff, Major General Hobart Gay, to prepare contingency plans. 3 distinct strategies for turning the army north, each tailored to different scenarios: Ireland, Luxembourg, and Dieppe. Gay considered it excessive, even paranoid, but he understood that arguing with Patton was pointless. While Third Army continued its offensive in the Saar, his staff labored secretly on the alternate plans, mapping road networks, calculating fuel consumption, and evaluating which divisions could move fastest. By the 18th of December, when the German offensive was in full swing, Patton's preparations were complete. 3 fully developed operational plans lay ready, awaiting only the command to execute. At the Verdun meeting on the 19th of December, when Eisenhower inquired about the Army's readiness, Patton already knew the answer. He had war-gamed every scenario, ensured logistical support, briefed his commanders, and coordinated every movement in advance. The Germans, however, had no idea that the Third Army was poised for action, that it could move faster than their calculations suggested. By the 20th of December, Bastogne's situation had grown dire. The 101st Airborne Division and elements of the 10th Armored Division were completely encircled. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe commanded roughly 18,000 men, who were rapidly running out of ammunition, food, and medical supplies. The weather prevented any resupply by air, and inside Bastogne, the air was tense and quiet. Not because the fighting had ceased, but because every shot had become precious. Soldiers listened for the sound of German tanks and troops approaching, uncertain if anyone beyond the perimeter even knew they were still alive. On the 22nd of December, German commanders sent a formal surrender demand to McAuliffe, emphasizing the hopelessness of the American situation and giving him 2 hours to respond. McAuliffe's reply was laconic but legendary: nuts. When asked for clarification, an American colonel explained simply that it meant they could go to hell. Yet, despite the defiance, the tactical reality remained grim. Bastogne's defenders were surrounded, outgunned, and suffering mounting casualties. German commanders, including von Manteuffel, were confident that Patton was at least 10 days away. What they did not know was that the Third Army was already in motion. 3 divisions, totaling approximately 133,000 men, disengaged from the Saar and turned north. The 4th Armored Division spearheaded the movement, followed by the 26th Infantry Division and supporting units. Behind them, the entire logistical apparatus of the Third Army pivoted to support the operation. German reconnaissance aircraft glimpsed fragments of the movement on the 20th and 21st of December. But visibility was poor, hampered by winter storms and snow. Ground intelligence reported some activity near Arland, 25 miles south of Bastogne, but assumed it was routine repositioning. Their calculations, already based on flawed assumptions, were now obsolete. Patton's maneuver was unprecedented, moving an entire army, including divisions, artillery, engineers, and logistical support, 90 degrees across a 75-mile front in winter, while under the threat of enemy contact, had no precedent in American military history. The Third Army had to move over 133,000 men, 11,000 vehicles, and hundreds of thousands of tons of supplies across icy roads, often with limited daylight and constant danger from accidents or enemy action. Traffic control was critical. Military police were stationed at every intersection to direct vehicles along assigned routes. Officers with maps physically ensured the columns kept moving, waking exhausted drivers and maintaining pace. The weather compounded the challenge. Sub-zero temperatures, icy roads, and snowstorms slowed progress. Trucks and tanks skidded, soldiers battled exhaustion, and mechanical failures threatened to stall the advance. Yet the Third Army had prepared for these conditions. Its logistics officers had trained for rapid movement under harsh conditions, and division commanders knew how to push their men while maintaining cohesion. Patton's strategy embraced risk, understanding that speed was paramount and that the southern flank might be exposed. When his staff warned him of the danger, he dismissed it, insisting the Germans should be worrying about their own vulnerabilities. On the 20th of December, at 4 in the morning, the first elements of the 4th Armored Division began their march north. Miles of vehicles followed, forming a seemingly endless column. Officers walked alongside vehicles, waking drivers, coordinating movements, and keeping morale high. The advance continued relentlessly through the 21st, while German intelligence, hampered by poor visibility, assumed these were minor movements. They had no conception of the scale or speed of the operation. By enforcing strict radio silence, Patton further confounded the Germans. Their signal intelligence units, used to monitoring American communications, were unable to track the Army's movements. Suddenly, a force of over 130,000 men seemed to vanish, striking terror into German command as they realized they had lost sight of a critical army. At 6 in the morning on the 22nd of December, Patton's Third Army struck. The 4th Armored Division smashed into the German southern flank near Arland, Luxembourg. German units were stunned, unprepared for such a massive, coordinated assault. Sherman tanks emerged from the fog and snow. Artillery unleashed devastation, and infantry pressed forward with relentless momentum. The 5th Panzer Division, tasked with defending the line south of Bastogne, was caught off guard. Patton's forces penetrated their defenses swiftly, and the advance toward Bastogne, 25 miles to the north, was underway. Von Monteil's headquarters received reports around noon of a strong American armored attack near Arland. Multiple divisions were identified, and enemy forces were moving north. The intelligence officer struggled to explain the anomaly. Patton was supposed to be in the Saar. The assessment had been catastrophically wrong. Immediate orders were given to pull elite panzer units and elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division to form a blocking force south of Bastogne. Yet they had to move under attack, improvising defensively against a force moving faster than predicted. The resulting engagement became a brutal struggle as the German southern flank attempted to resist the relentless American advance. Behind the 4th Armored Division, the rest of 3rd Army arrived, reinforcing the attack. Infantry divisions pushed forward, supporting armor and artillery. The German southern flank was collapsing under overwhelming force. On the 23rd of December, von Monteil sent an urgent message to Field Marshal Walter Model of Army Group B, reporting that Patton had struck with at least 3 divisions. Their intelligence had been fatally flawed. Model, furious, demanded an explanation for how an entire American army had moved unnoticed. Von Monteil could only admit that the Third Army had operated beyond all assumptions. The offensive's timetable was shattered. Bastogne could no longer be isolated and destroyed swiftly. The German forces found themselves stretched thin, forced to fight on 2 fronts simultaneously: the siege of Bastogne and the defense against Patton's advance. Their operational plan, reliant on speed and momentum, was collapsing. The gamble of rapid success had failed. Patton, moving faster than the Germans could react, had seized the initiative, leaving them scrambling to react instead of executing their own strategy. At 4:50 p.m. on the 26th of December, the lead elements of the 4th Armored Division entered Bastogne, breaking the siege. First Lieutenant Charles Bogus, commanding the lead Sherman tank Cobra King, made contact with the 101st Airborne. Behind him, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams and the 37th Tank Battalion advanced after 4 days of relentless combat, covering 25 miles from Arlon to Bastogne against determined resistance. The troops in Bastogne, exhausted and outnumbered, finally saw relief. Soldiers emerged from their positions, cheering, crying, and shaking hands with the arriving armored forces. The defenders had endured a week of unimaginable stress, and the sight of the American White Star on the Sherman tanks meant hope and survival. General McAuliffe met with the relief column commanders, coordinating resupply and reinforcement. The relief of Bastogne was both a tactical victory and a symbolic disaster for the Germans. They had gambled everything on speed and surprise, yet Patton had moved faster than their most optimistic calculations, shattering the timeline they had relied upon. Von Manteuffel immediately recognized the implications. Bastogne remained in Allied hands, the southern flank exposed, and the offensive was doomed. Though Hitler ordered continued attacks, the reality was clear. The Germans had lost momentum, initiative, and the advantage of surprise. Patton's approach validated his philosophy of warfare: speed, decisiveness, and aggression. Overwhelming force was less important than moving faster than the enemy could react, disrupting their decision cycles and forcing them into reactive positions. In a press conference in January 1945, Patton reflected that his army had moved normally, while others had moved too slowly. The difference, he implied, was in mindset, in willingness to accept calculated risks, and in preparation. The relief of Bastogne became legendary, studied in military academies as the epitome of rapid redeployment, and a demonstration that what seems impossible can be accomplished in mere days when leadership, planning, and will converge. Patton, ever forward-looking, considered Bastogne only a prelude. His diary on the 29th of December noted that the diversion was necessary, but the war demanded continued offensive action. The German miscalculations had been catastrophic, not because their forces were weak, but because Patton operated at a tempo they could not anticipate, leveraging speed and audacity to create the impossible. The lesson endured. In warfare, the capacity to make swift decisions, to act before the enemy anticipates, and to accept risk when it matters most can turn the tide, rendering even the most meticulous enemy calculations irrelevant. Bastogne's relief would be remembered not just for its tactical significance, but for the demonstration of a principle that defined Patton's career: when others hesitate, speed wins, and the impossible can be done.